Do you know?
Thanks, Gillian. I know Gillian introduced me earlier, but just to recap, I'm Norman Williamson, so I'm one of the dementia advisors at Alzheimer Scotland. So in this presentation, we're going to look at changes in behaviour, how behaviour is used as communication, and hopefully I'll help explain how to maybe better understand that. So if we say that as a person's dementia progresses, the person may experience difficulties, especially around communication and expressing themselves. And that can cause a wide range of emotions, which can lead to a change in behaviours. So I'm just going to set the scene here. I'm going to use a quick analogy, and hopefully it will get you thinking. So imagine if you're trying to tune a radio into your favourite station. I'm maybe showing my age here with the old analogue radio. But if you can imagine, you're trying to tune it into your favourite station, and the signal is very poor. It's fuzzy. And no matter what you're doing, you can only hear that kind of static sound, that kind of crackly noise. So it can often feel like this when talking to someone with dementia. But the important thing here is on the person's end of the conversation, they're unaware that the signal's poor. So as far as they're concerned, everything they say is making perfect sense. So I'm just going to look at some changes in behaviour that are associated with dementia, and I know there'll be many more, but I hope some of you will be familiar with some of these examples. So there's repeating actions or words or gestures, which that can involve the person maybe asking the same question again and again, maybe repeating a task such as packing or unpacking a bag, or maybe making multiple phone calls to a family member or a friend. So there's being restless, perhaps pacing up and down in the room or the hallway, maybe continually fidgeting. Shouting, maybe repeatedly calling out for someone, or maybe a person from the past or an object from the past. Showing lack of inhibition, that could involve addressing somebody inappropriately, or maybe undressing at an inappropriate time. And it can also include improper sexual behaviour. And then there's constantly following a loved one around the room or around the house. And perhaps the person's becoming increasingly suspicious, maybe suspecting that people are plotting against them, maybe trying to catch them out, or sometimes hiding things from you. Becoming confused or disorientated at the end of the day. I think some of you might be familiar with the term sundowning. And then just generally being anxious and agitated. And that can be frequently be associated with a direct result of the profound nature and changes brought about by dementia. So as you can see, there's many forms of behaviour that can be challenging. There's actually many more than that, I'm sure you'll appreciate. So it can be challenging when caring for a person with dementia, and particularly so as the illness progresses. So it's the dementia talking. I'm sure you've all heard that phrase. It's a commonly used metaphor, and it allows us to understand probably how complex dementia can be. And it can also help us cope better with challenging situations. However, it also has the ability to hide or misrepresent. So when we say it's the dementia talking, what we're doing is we're humanising the disease, if you can see what I mean. But at the same time, we're dehumanising the person that's living with dementia. So, in other words, the metaphor can hide key human qualities that the person may still retain, such as interacting or expressing feelings. And it can also prevent us from finding out the real reason behind the challenging words or the behaviour. So there can be various reasons behind a change in behaviour. Some examples could be, a wife maybe who's cared for her husband and children all her life, could be finding that role reversal difficult to accept. Or maybe a triggered memory from childhood could affect a person's behaviour. So a person's surroundings can also have an impact. For example, if a person with dementia doesn't recognise the reflection in the mirror, they may become anxious that another person's in the room. Now, the images that I've put on the screen there, they obviously show people content in seeing their younger selves in the mirror. However, sometimes mirrors can be distressing if the person doesn't recognise themselves. So behaviour is communication, whether it's good, bad or indifferent. It's a clear expression of our feelings and our needs. So people with dementia, they may lose the ability to communicate verbally as the disease progresses. However, the important point here is that a person can continue to communicate in other ways. So sometimes behaviour is a direct result of the type of dementia a person has. However, as is on the screen there, most behaviour that may appear to be challenging happens when a person with dementia has a need that has not been met, or trying probably unsuccessfully to express their feelings. And a quick example here, there was a lady, she was becoming agitated whenever anybody tried to assist her with her care. But when it was acknowledged that she had a lifetime experience working as a senior nurse, people started asking her opinion on simple issues where they knew she would feel that her input was valued. So just by doing that had a positive impact on her and helped her to make her feel much more secure and comfortable. And more importantly, the agitation that she was displaying soon disappeared. So let's look at how we communicate. I'm sure you're all aware, we communicate mainly through facial expressions, body language, gestures and touch. So 55% of our communication is non-verbal, and the remaining 45% is made up of the words we use and the tone and pitch of our voice. So when speech is difficult and the dementia is clouding how the person thinks, exhibiting a behaviour is a way of being heard. I think the important point here is that non-verbal communication provides clues about how someone is feeling and what they're trying to communicate to us. So what are the causes of changes in behaviour with people living with dementia? So first of all, no two people experience dementia in the same way. And a person's behaviour will be influenced by so many things. So the type of dementia the person has, their personality, their health, and the support and the environment around them. And just going back to that phrase, it's the dementia talking. When a person with dementia behaves differently, it's often mistaken as a direct result of the dementia. Maybe another symptom of the condition. However, that's often not the case. So behaviour can have many causes. Obviously, these can include difficulties relating to dementia, such as the memory loss, the language problems, orientation problems. But it can also have mental and physical health issues. There can be personality issues, interactions with others and the environment around them. Therefore, possible causes of someone behaving out of character can be divided into these three areas. So there's biological, so that would be, for instance, being in pain. There's psychological, such as perceiving a threat. And then there's social, maybe being bored or understimulated. So when a person with dementia, when you're supporting a person with dementia who's behaving out of character, it's important to see beyond the behaviour itself and think about what may be causing it. Because sometimes behaviour can be a result of frustration in the way others around the person are behaving. It can be a sense of being out of control or a feeling of just simply not being listened to or understood. So people with dementia have got the same basic needs as everybody else. However, they may be less able to communicate. They may be able to less able to recognise their needs or how to meet them or communicate them. So behaviour may be an attempt to meet a need. For example, removing clothing because they're too hot, maybe walking around because they're bored or they feel they need to be somewhere. So behaviour may be an attempt to communicate a need, maybe shouting out just because they need the toilet. So dementia can make the world a confusing and frightening place as the person struggles to understand what is going on around them. Okay, I'm going to just give you a quick example just to try and illustrate the message. This is a true story, and it's one of the examples we use in the Dementia Friends sessions, but I think it's a really good example. So I'm just going to read this out. There was a man who lived in a nursing home, and every day he would sit in a chair in the corridor. And every time someone walked past, he would start to become agitated and upset. He'd be shouting at people and waving his arms. The staff and the residents began to avoid him, and therefore he became isolated and lonely. One day, his relatives visited, and they began to talk about his past. And they shared that during the war, he worked in the bomb disposal division, and his job was to sit next to a landmined area and guide people through on a safe path. The staff realised that the man was reliving this part of his life, and when he was shouting, he believed that people were walking through the minefield. They were ignoring his directions. So this changed the staff's approach, and from then on, every time they passed him in the corridor, they would stop and ask him to guide them through. It meant that it would take a few seconds longer to walk up the corridor, but it had a huge positive impact on the man's life. He was no longer frustrated, but instead he had purpose again. People engaged with him. They were talking to him about his time in the war and seeing him with this renewed respect. And his quality of life improved so much just by supporting him to live well with dementia. So the message that I want you to take from this story is that any out of character behaviour will have meaning to the person with dementia. So it's likely to be an attempt to enhance and maintain a sense of well-being and try and ease distress. So any response should involve trying to see things from the person's perspective. So when managing a situation where a person with dementia is behaving out of character, it's important not to see the behaviour as just another symptom that needs treating. A problem-solving approach is needed to try to work out why the person's behaviour has changed. Out of character behaviours can resolve over time and they can be successfully managed by carers. However, there may be times when professional help is needed, so it's important to add here that if there's any sudden changes in behaviour, these can be the result of physical health problems. So the first instance, it's always a good idea just to consult the GP just to rule out any physical problems. So as a carer, you might find a step-by-step problem-solving approach can help manage out of character behaviours. So the next 3 slides I've tried to summarise some areas to consider. So first of all, define the problem. Is the person's behaviour really a problem? Is the problem actually the reaction or attitudes of others towards the person or the behaviour? Or perhaps it's a response to an interaction with the person. Next, it's a good idea to consider the situation and look at the circumstances contributing to the problem. So for instance, when and where does the behaviour happen? Are there any notable instances when the behaviour doesn't happen? Does the person always behave in the same way in the same place? And then you could look at maybe, are there any patterns to the behaviour? And then finally, assess the person in the situation and whether the person appears to be in pain or discomfort or unwell. Maybe they're tired, overstimulated, they could be bored or lacking in social contact. Could they be feeling embarrassed, ignored or misunderstood? Or perhaps they're responding to an unpleasant incident or a change or a provocation. So once all these points have been considered, you may be able to develop a strategy to manage the behaviour. So you talk to the person, talk to others around them and try and come up with a plan. And then start to make some changes, whether they've made a difference. And of course, it's going to take some trial and error to find any effective solution. But the important thing is it requires a person-centred approach. So always try to make sure that the interests of the person with dementia are at the centre of any solution. So I'm going to finish up with some general tips and approaches that can be tried to support a person who's behaving differently. So try to remember that the person's not been deliberately difficult. It goes without saying, but don't take it personally, because their sense of reality may be very different from yours, and they're probably trying to respond to their own needs. Knowledge of the person and their history always helps. So, for example, if you knew that a person maybe worked night shifts during their working life, that could maybe explain why they stay up at night or maybe want to leave the house at night. Likewise, if a person maybe picked up the children from school at a certain time, that maybe explain why they would be becoming restless and agitated in the afternoon. And even though a person with dementia may have difficulties with their memory, remember that they still retain emotions. So it's important to think about how they're feeling, what they're trying to express, and how to support their emotions. So offer the person gentle reassurance. Try stepping away from the situation if needed, and look at the person's body language and try to understand what they might be feeling at the time. And then an important point, consider whether the behaviour is really a problem. If it's disrupting a particular activity, such as washing or dressing, you could ask yourself if the task needs to be done at that precise time, or maybe you could come back to it later. Just some more general tips. Support the person to be as independent as possible and try and encourage them to do as much as they can for themselves, because the behaviour, it could be a response to the person feeling that they're not able to contribute, or maybe they're not feeling valued by others. If you think the person is bored, try and support them to engage in meaningful activities. Try to adapt to the present situation. Like insisting that things can go back to the way they were before, or expecting too much of the person can create further problems. And once again, as I said earlier, if the person is frequently or persistently behaving out of character, it's maybe an idea to consult the GP. Now, as I said, these are only tips and strategies, and it's going to take some degree of trial and error to find any effective solution. As I mentioned earlier, I've repeated this slide because I think it's so important that any strategy requires a person-centred approach, and always try to make sure that the interests of the person's dementia are always at the centre of any solution. So I'm just going to finish with a quote from Professor Tom Kitwood. And he said, when you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. So Kitwood, he was a pioneer in the field of dementia care during the 1980s, and his aim was to understand as far as possible what care was actually like from the standpoint of the person with dementia. So Kitwood, he helped us understand the message that I'm trying to portray here, and that no two people experience dementia in the same way. And the way a person reacts to their dementia will be shaped by their individuality and how their personality and life experience influence their response to dementia and their relationships and interactions with others. So that's me done. That's the presentation finished. I hope it was interesting. I hope it gave you some hints and tips and maybe a better understanding of how communication and behaviour are linked. So I think there'll be a chance at the end to ask questions. So in the meantime, I think I will hand back to, is it Gillian next?
Yeah, thanks, Norman, and thanks so much for your presentation today. That was fantastic, and you're absolutely right. We'll make sure there's plenty of space for questions at the end of the webinar. But equally, if people have questions coming to their heads right now, they can pop them in the chat box, and we'll follow up on those later in the webinar. So I'm now going to introduce Angie Inch, another of our dementia advisors. Welcome, Angie.
Oh, thank you very much, Gillian, for that lovely introduction. Just like Norman, I work as a dementia advisor. I cover Eastern Bartonshire, and thank you for inviting me along today to talk about something I feel very strongly about. And again, thanks to Norman for explaining a really complicated topic in such a short time and covering it so well. And hopefully I'm going to build on that, because we're going to look at some more problem solving, and I'm just going to share, as this is not going to work, is it? This is going to be misbehave. Right, there we go. So let's go again and see if we can get this to share. Right. There we go. It's working now. So I'm going to talk about a lady taps, because we were talking about behaviour. So I'm going to ask you about this lady as we go further on, and I'll ask you to put comments in the chat. Gillian's going to kindly look at those and feed them back to us. And it means we can discuss and actually work out how a behaviour is working for the person, what it's communicating, and is it just the dementia? Norman's got that spot on. Quite often we blame a lot on the dementia itself. So I like this slide because back to Kitwood, I know that Norman talks about Kitwood, but see if we look at a person as a behaviour, we lose sight of who the person is, because people aren't tasks, and that's still so correct. I mean, if you know the person, you might understand why the behaviour is happening, but the person is not the behaviour. Because is it only words? Norman talked about 45% of all communication being verbal. But if I told you only 7% of the communication was actually the words itself, that means 93% of all communication is not actually the words we use. So why do we focus on the words and not the message? And how much do we miss of the message by doing that? I always worry about that we miss a lot of the message itself. So, a lady taps. We've got a lady in a local care home, again back to a true story, because you just kind of make them up. They're so helpful. And she taps the moment she wakes up till late in the day when she's too tired to tap. Can you all hear that?
Yeah, we can hear a faint tapping in the background, Angie.
Right. Can you imagine if that was going all day? Who wants me to stop? But it's really quite difficult. This lady did this all day, and it meant it actually drove the staff away from her. It drove the other residents into finding ways of avoiding being in her company. And it's just too much for people to cope with. So, what do you think the staff did to remedy the situation? And if I can ask you to maybe type some bits into the chat box so that we can maybe discuss some of the ideas, what you think the staff would have done to remedy what they saw as the situation. Because this was something they would really have had to have tackled and looked at, especially if other people living in the care setting were saying, I can't live with that, I can't do that. Why is she doing this all the time? So is there anything coming through, Gillian?
Not yet, Andy. I'm just
Yeah,
keeping an eye on it.
Someone's saying they might have put her in a room on her own. Someone else is saying they maybe would have given her a keyboard so that she could have typed on a keyboard.
Okay, that's a good one. I like that one. That's the first time I've had that one suggested.
Somebody else is saying providing something soft for her to tap on or change the surface is coming through. Other people are saying find out what her job was before.
Oh, now that's an interesting one. We'll come to that.
Yep.
The staff also did things like they cut her fingernails. They'd moved tables away from her, and the lady used a stick to walk with. So quite often what they would do was move the stick so she couldn't tap against the chair she was sitting on. So the lady taps. One day the scouts came to visit. It was Christmas, and in amongst the carols and the mince pies, one scout went up and asked one of the members of staff, why does that lady know Morse code? So staff were like, what? Well, what's she tapping? And the scout said, SOS. She's looking for help. How do you think the staff felt at that point? Can you imagine how they felt when they realised this lady had been constantly, all day, every day, asking for help? How do you think they felt? Is anybody putting any comments in?
Just keeping an eye out just now
No.
for people. Somebody said guilty.
Yep, they did. They were incredibly guilty. It was a bit like, I remember a lady was in hospital once and she kept lifting her hands. The moment staff came near her, it took a relative to come up to say that the lady was deaf and she was trying to sign to them. So they had stopped this lady communicating by putting towels across her table, moving tables, cutting her nails. And do you know the most amazing thing they found out? The lady who never spoke could communicate. She could tell them when she needed something to eat, a drink, even ask them to go to the toilet. But the big mystery was, why was this lady fluent in Morse code? Now, I know somebody asked about her previous job. And guess what? The lady tapped less now. Do you think, yeah, because she was being understood? So that made a big difference for that lady. Her niece came over from Australia and the mystery was solved. She only ever came over every few years and she would visit her aunt when she was over. So the staff asked her, why does your aunt know Morse code? The niece looked surprised and said, do you not know about my aunt? Well, staff said no, they actually didn't. She went on to say that her aunt had worked at Bletchley Park as a code breaker. She dedicated her time to her work and she'd never married, so therefore the niece was the only person that held that woman's memories. So guess what? That lady, who everybody avoided, became a hero. And everybody wanted to spend their time with her because behaviour is communication. And how do we listen? Well, we listen with our ears. No, we listen with our eyes and we listen with our hearts. How often have you thought, there's something wrong here and not a word's been spoken? I'm sure that's happened to you quite a bit. And sometimes you're not quite sure what's wrong. And that can be really difficult because we all have different ways of communicating, even if we don't know what we're communicating. I want to talk to you about, quite often you'll hear somebody talking in dementia about repeated behaviours. So we had a gentleman who constantly cleans his glasses for hours every day. The staff cleaned them for him. He would still tuck and keep cleaning them. So people tried to work out what it was, and it became down to, well, it's a repeated behaviour. The gentleman's got dementia. Do you think that was the case? Does anybody want to say, do you think that was the case? Just maybe a comment, maybe do you think there was maybe a reason why he did this? Well, if I told...
Somebody said he might need new glasses.
Yep. That was what the family thought. There was something wrong there. They didn't want to put this down.
Eyesight or something wrong with his eyes. People are asking maybe that's what's happening.
Epic. That is exactly what the family thought. There was something going on. Whereas the care home was quite happy to accept the fact that this was just something the gentleman did. If I put up the next slide, he had a cataract in his right eye. Now, this had actually been discounted because he'd had 10 years before had a cataract dealt with in that eye. But sometimes when they do the operation, they leave a wee bit of lens left so it helps the person's vision. And he was unlucky enough to have that to cloud over. So that gentleman didn't know what he was communicating, but he was communicating beautifully what was going on for him. So what about the lady who keeps taking her false teeth out? Does she have mouth issues? Are her false teeth too loose? Could be a lot of reasons for that. And a common one we hear about is people taking their hearing aids off or hiding them or putting them off. Are they telling us something? Are they telling us it's too noisy for them? Are they telling us they're set wrongly? Or they just want a little time to themselves? Always think about the fact that someone living with dementia might not be able to tell you what they're experiencing, but their behaviour might. And that might be the easiest way back to that listening with your ears, listening with your eyes, listening with your heart. And actions always speak louder than words. What are your actions saying to the people you're trying to communicate with? Do you know you're the most important part to that person's that's living with illness, their environment? Back to that 93% of all communications, not words. What do you communicate? Does the person feel valued? Or are they just a task? Remember care home staff saying, but we've got to get people to bed, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. But is that the case? Do people feel glad that you're helping them? Or do they feel as if that you're needing to help them? I always talk about people having their inner smile. My husband says I've got an inner smile. I could be walking down the street and somebody will stop me and ask for directions or ask me a question about something. Even when I was in Paris, that was an interesting one. But I just think, can they see my inner smile? And you don't have to talk sometimes. I love this quote, and I'm going to read it out if you don't mind, because the Glasgow accent adds to it, I think. My wife and I were always ones for the dancing. We met at the dancing, you know. This dementia she's got means we can't talk the way we used to, but we can dance. We go out on a Friday night with friends to the bowling club. But every day, I push the chairs back and we re-dance in the front room. She minds all the steps still, and when I hold her tight and burl her round, and she laughs. Well, she's still the girl I married, isn't she? Isn't she? And this is a vicious circle that I hope none of you end up being part of. The person with dementia finds it difficult to communicate. Other people assume they have little wish to communicate. Therefore, they don't take the time and trouble to find out if they do want to. And that makes it even harder for the person to break through these assumptions. That's food for thought, isn't it? But sometimes just looking at the behaviour and knowing a bit about the person, like I love that story Norman tells about the gentleman in the minefield. It just explains so much, doesn't it? So thanks very much for listening today, and I'm so looking forward to listening to the carers as they tell you how communication affects them. But again, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Angie. That was brilliant.
That's great, thank you. And also just to let everyone know that we'll be creating handouts after each of the webinars that we run, which will have a lot of the information that's been shared on the slides, and always recording the sessions as well. So you'll all get a link to the recording of the session, which means you can go back and view it at any point yourself. So you can go back through all of the information, because sometimes it's hard to take all of that in at the one time. Okay, so I'd like to now take us on to the section where we're going to hear from some real life experiences round about communication and how that's affected the relationships for these carers who are members of the Tide Network. And they're two incredible ladies who are going to share some very personal information and experiences about how it's affected their lives. So it's just about remaining within that safe space, and obviously giving them a bit of grace as well if they do get a little bit emotional as they're telling you these stories, because it is about how it's happened in their lives and how it's affected their relationships with the people that they care for. So the first lady I'd like to introduce is Elizabeth Wilson, and she's going to talk about communication and how that has impacted on her and her husband. So if you want to just take it away, Elizabeth.
Hello everybody. One or two of you I know from other places, so apologies if you know quite a lot of this information. But my husband, David, is now in a care home with end-stage dementia, Alzheimer's. But I would like to tell you a wee bit about our lives beforehand and maybe help explain the problems that we had communicating and how we dealt with it. David and I didn't meet until our 40s. And when we realized we loved each other, we wanted to really have a very close and sustained relationship, because we both had experiences of failed marriages. I think we had a lot in common. We were both sociable, outgoing, and we maintained separate friendships and cultivated new ones together. David was an artist, quite laid back, a graphic design lecturer who loved computing, photography, jazz, wine, and spent all his money on Audi cars. I enjoyed reading, theatre, and hosting friends. I became a counsellor and worked in the voluntary sector for many years, so we'd always plenty to share and discuss. We had very similar tastes in home improvements and a lot of fun planning, holidays at home and abroad. We enjoyed the same TV programmes, films and music, and luckily we shared very similar views on religion and politics. We laughed a lot, we rarely argued for over 20 years, and when there were disagreements, we tended to resolve these quickly. David liked to express his opinions very forcefully. He had a very good way of expressing himself. He was confident, but he also had a brilliant sense of humour. I was more anxious, more reserved probably, and often lacked self-confidence around change. So I found his cheerful optimism and his love of life very inspiring and liberating. Like any relationships, there were contentious issues which had to be resolved, but we tended to be kind to one another, sensitive, and we always had a mutual desire to please the other. In 2014, David began to struggle to express himself and experienced a little memory loss. This led to speech therapy and medical tests, but a brain scan in hospital showed there was a problem, but the results were inconclusive. At that point, the warning signals should have come, but unfortunately, around this time, he was diagnosed with stage 3 prostate cancer. And for the next 3 years, he underwent radiotherapy and hormone treatment. This had an enormous impact on our lives and our relationship. David had a very bad reaction to some of the drugs. He stopped enjoying many activities and grew quite morose and introspective. We both noticed further memory problems, but his speech remained intact at this time, and he could talk readily, especially with close friends. So we tended to, I've got to say, ignore what was a very slow cognitive decline. I was probably more affected emotionally at this time than he was, as I had lost several close family members to cancer. But David tended to ignore his illness, refused to dwell on it. And I think I had to cope with his depressive moods and be particularly sensitive to the physical challenges that the drug treatments had for him. By 2017, he had recovered from the cancer, but it was clear that his speech problems and failures in memory were becoming really significant. And his speech was particularly badly affected, but also he was unable to use and enjoy his computer and cameras as before. Friends noticed difficulties in maintaining conversations and these increased random outbursts. At the same time, he also seemed to withdraw physically and emotionally from me. For the first time in our lives together, he became openly critical and verbally abusive, only to me, much to the shock of his friends and family, who had always regarded us as a very close and loving couple. I became very upset as he withdrew affection, and he used to even talk about separation, although he quickly withdrew threats. Later that year, when his psychiatrist raised the possibility that he was suffering from dementia, David was very brave and accepted this without much comment, but he showed little curiosity. And I think, to be quite honest, he just wanted to ignore it and go on with his life. However, I did a lot of research, and as a result, I think I became more patient and compassionate as I began to understand the reasons for his changes in the personality and the behaviour. His diagnosis of Alzheimer's was made after a second scan in March 2018. We were both quite stunned at being actually told this outright, but I wasn't at all surprised. I was offered immediate help and advice in dealing with David's condition by his CPN and frequent appointments with his psychiatrist. The fantastic staff at East Renfrewshire Carers Service supplied not only empathic support, but also activities for him and for me, like relaxation and mindfulness courses, which sustained my health and well-being. They offered excellent training and signposted me to links with Alzheimer Scotland, SDS, Money and Rights Team, and eventually the social work involvement. I was very disempowered and ignorant at this time, but I was able to cope better, taking on more and more responsibilities in the home and trying to keep our lives in an even keel and create enjoyable opportunities for friends and leisure. We tried as far as possible to lead what I would call a normal life, but a holiday in Sorrento in 2019 was our final trip abroad, as it was fraught with extreme difficulties. I tried hard at this point not to assume a parenting role and to break ideas into simple statements. My aim was to preserve David's sense of being respected and to calm frequent angry outbursts. He grew verbally aggressive. For example, he constantly blamed me for the loss of his driving license, but I never ever felt physically threatened or even that he meant it in a personal way. I had great support from friends and family, but I was increasingly lonely, sad, and filled with great concerns and foreboding about the future. I've got to say it was impossible not to be cross, mean, and frustrated, bad-tempered at times, and this made me feel very, very guilty and anxious. David would refuse to be reasonable and often made the fundamental error of trying to talk sense and tell him what was real, rather than accept that he was starting to perceive people in life in a totally different way, but one that was real and true for him. I had to learn over a long period of time how to enter into his world and go along with his often bizarre ideas, like his father was visiting, his father who'd been dead for 10 years. I tried to treat him with great respect, patience, and compassion. I've got to say, though, I'm pretty ashamed that I often fell short of the mark. And I remember going into the back room once and actually howling like a dog because I just didn't know how to cope. I grew physically and mentally exhausted with the daily struggles, coping with delusions, sundowning, and his inability to sleep at night. He would refuse to sit beside me. He would constantly pace the floors. He would strip off all his clothes, even although they were comfortable and ones he'd chosen himself, sometimes up to 10 times each evening. He grew reluctant to shave and shower and couldn't dress unaided. And I'm afraid I quite often left him unshowered in the morning. He was often withdrawn and unable to show love or receive affection. And what hurt me so much at this point was he recoiled when I tried to hug or touch him or show him any gentle behaviour. What upset me most, though, was that in front of others, when people came to the home, his pals or people we knew, he could be charming and friendly. And this masked the problems I was enduring on a daily basis. I tried to access supports as activities dwindled, and these helped for a while, but he didn't enjoy a 12-week cognitive course as he was unable to contribute verbally. He felt patronised and that the activities were quite infantile. However, more successful was the weekly 2-hour individual buddy service provided by the Richmond Fellowship, who paired him with this fantastic man, John, who also liked photography and music. This gave David some stimulation, but it gave me also a much needed break from the caring role. The Carers Association with Alzheimer Scotland also organised lunch meetings, and although David couldn't contribute to conversations by this time, he enjoyed the outings and being outside with others. However, he became unable to read, focus on screens and follow narratives, so he stopped being able to read newspapers or to enjoy going to the cinema. He refused to watch television, so evenings grew sometimes quite long and difficult. As time passed, he lost his desire to listen to his extensive collection of music. He started to be very restless, wandering around the house or sitting for lengthy periods in a chair in the hall, refusing to communicate at all. I tried to give him space, I tried to be close, I tried everything. I didn't realise at the time that actually I was going through a grief process. I was grieving. I was never in denial or angry at David's decline, but I was deeply saddened by the loss of our loving communication, our partnership, our emotional and physical closeness, and the end of all our projected future retirement plans, which had involved travel and adventure. I really became his mother and was nervous and hypervigilant most of the time. I felt my whole life was shrinking as I had to give up activities as he couldn't be left alone for long periods in the house. I missed the teasing and the sense of being cared for, and sometimes felt a really acute physical pain through anxiety. He failed to remember my birthday or wedding anniversary, didn't want to celebrate special times. I found solace in trying to see the often funny and bizarre side of the experiences and connecting with others in my caring groups who understood me through their own individual experiences of caring for a partner with dementia. I continue to be so grateful and thankful for all the people in all these groups who share their own experiences. I don't think others fully understand the strains of coping 24 hours a day, 7 days a week on your own. The first lockdown in March 2020 had a disastrous effect, and David suffered what we call the perfect storm. Not only were all his supports and activities immediately withdrawn, but he suffered a huge dip in his condition. He had increasing difficulty conversing with anyone, and even his best friend, who was most attentive and great with him, was shocked at his growing inability to talk except for disjointed words and phrases. He began to wander, and I had to call the police twice when he disappeared from home. However, at this point, he still maintained some of his humour and some limited awareness, saying to my daughter when the police brought him home, "I'm in trouble now." And he wasn't really, but that's what he said. He started to lose balance, fall easily, and become trapped behind doors. He became doubly incontinent, but he was totally unaware of this. We'd go out for daily walks to alleviate the numbing boredom of lockdown, but he couldn't perceive pavements and frequently stumbled. He also would try to go to his work, sometimes at 3 in the morning. By May, I was exhausted, having had virtually no interrupted sleep for 6 weeks. Often he didn't recognise me or family and refused to engage, even with Gail, his CPN, whom he really liked. After he had 2 bad falls, I was offered some respite to put David into temporary care. He failed to recognise me or my daughter when we visited outside, and I was really devastated. A few weeks later, the decision was made on professional advice that his Alzheimer's had advanced to such an extent that he needed 24-hour care, which I couldn't provide. I had no choice, and I agreed to David being moved into his current nursing home in June, even although I was unable to check its suitability. Surprisingly, he settled in very quickly. He's never been a problem for the staff, but I was in shock at the speed of this transition, and I was overwhelmed by sudden loss of control. I felt, and I've got to say, I still feel guilty and ashamed that I wasn't able to cope longer. I continue to miss his presence in the house even after all these months. It's terribly lonely at times. I was unable to visit him for weeks at a time due to lockdowns and the aftermath of a fall and a short hospital stay. As the weather grew colder, outside visits became brief and very, very uncomfortable. David often failed to recognise me or even decide to stay seated outside as the temperature fell one day to 7 degrees. David caught COVID in the second wave on the 27th of December, and the long-term effects of this disease and the further progression of his dementia has meant that he's been bedbound for over 4 months now, emaciated, living in a wee world of his own. He's well cared for and I think loved by the staff, but he sleeps most of the time, is unable to eat independently, walk or express feelings, even pain. I am allowed 1 visit each week to give him his lunch, and he is now unable to say more than an occasional yes or no or of course as a response to inflections in my voice. But I do try to keep communications alive by sitting beside him, holding and stroking his hand, playing his favourite music on his iPhone. I show him photos and talk about his past and shared memories. I've no idea whether he understands or hears me, but I get great comfort from feeding him and from monitoring his well-being in the home. Last week, as I was leaving from a visit, he stretched out his hand towards me. And even if it was an involuntary action, it gave me a sense of our old togetherness, even for a short time. I still feel an overwhelming love for this man who's remarkable and talented, but I've had to accept my losses and realise we will never have a meaningful interaction or conversation again. I'm trying to look forward to a life which will be only mine in the future, but it's a hard and painful task. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Liz. That was very open and very honest. We really appreciate you telling us your story that way. And I think it's been a really good way to look at how communication has been through a relationship from the very beginning and how it has changed over that time through dementia. And I'm sure a lot of people can identify with that. And someone already in the chat box has said that you're amazing again for being so open and honest with us. So we really appreciate that. The next person I'm going to introduce is Deborah Feeney, and she's also a member of TIDE, and she's going to talk about her experiences with communication with both of her parents and how that has impacted her and her reflections on communication in general. So Deborah, if you'd like to take it away, please.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks, Liz. Well done. That was really lovely. Thank you. So I'm Debbie. I'm a carer for my dad, who was diagnosed with, first of all, non-specified dementia last March, just at the start of lockdown. And then we got the proper dementia of Alzheimer's in January this year. But I'd noticed for probably about 10 years, maybe more, that Dad's decision-making and his cognitive abilities were less than I was used to from him. My dad, I'm not going to say was, he still is a very intelligent man, but obviously I could see differences in him. I took him to the memory clinic probably about 5 or 6 years ago, but it's been a slow and gradual process to get to the point where we got the diagnosis. I'm his only daughter. I had 3 brothers, one has passed, 2 brothers, but there was a lot of love and respect between my dad and I. We worked together, so we had pretty good, well-developed communication skills and habits between us. I have studied quite a lot in my life. I've done 3 degrees, and in each of those degrees there was quite a focus on communication. So I know a little bit about NLP, and I know a little bit about transactional analysis, and I've got a kind of an HR background. So I've spent a lot of time talking to people, trying to understand people and be understood by people in management roles. So I thought I was, I was pretty good at communicating, and then came along Alzheimer's and kind of ripped up the rule book. It's a game changer, and the way that I was used to talking to Dad changed. Well, for us, it changed overnight last March. Last March, Dad, one Sunday afternoon, I was making the dinner. Mum and Dad live with me, and my partner Jim. And a Sunday afternoon, Mum came running through, shrieking in shock. I didn't know what had happened, and she said, "Your dad's shouting and swearing at Jim, and he was trying to hit Mum, accusing them of having an affair in the most foul language. My dad is the most dapper little gentleman you would ever meet." It was words I'd never heard come out of his mouth. And of course, I got such a shock as well, and I started shouting at him to try and get him to stop. But it was Jim, who, my partner, who maybe was just removed enough from it, who put his hand on my arm and he said, "That's not him." And I said, "What do you mean it's not him?" Of course it's him. But he said, "That's not your dad talking. That's not the way he talks. That's not him. Something is happening here." So the psych team got involved, and that's when we were just going into lockdown. So that's when they gave us the non-specified dementia diagnosis so that we can access services and help. And thank goodness that they did. They've been fantastic. The help and the care we've had has been amazing. So I think the shock for me as well was that it was so sudden and so uncharted for me, and I didn't know what to do with it, and I didn't know how to react to him. Being asked to do this talk has been really helpful for me because it's made me really think hard and systematically about how I communicate, particularly with my dad. And when I thought about how I like to communicate, there were three things that were really important to me. And the first was truth, the second was logic, and the third thing is intention. And when I thought about them in relation to Dad's Alzheimer's, I thought, well, it doesn't in any way value truth. It doesn't respect logic. But the one that was left was intention. And what I always try to do with everyone, I don't always succeed, but with everyone, and particularly with my dad now, is to try always to be kind in the way that I communicate. And that's something that I felt, Alzheimer's, you can't take that from me. That's my choice to be like that with him. Because I think dementia pulls the family in as well. And what it was starting to do was it still does affect the way my mum communicates with my dad, because she's scared, she's sad mostly. She gets angry, she gets frustrated beyond belief. And that comes out. And exactly what Norman was saying and what Angie was saying, it's that non-verbal stuff. So he knows when there's bad vibes around, he can pick up on it. And I try therefore just to always be as cool and calm as possible, and to basically get the message across to him, you're okay, it doesn't matter what's happening, you're okay, and Mum's okay, and I'm okay, we're all okay. Now I know we're not okay, but he doesn't need to know that. He doesn't need to know it. And I've got to learn, I think, that it's important not to sweat the small stuff, and also not to sweat the stuff that's not so small either. Unless there's something that's a welfare issue or a safety issue, I don't push it. And I think about repetitive behaviour, and repetitive behaviour then breeds repetitive behaviour, because my mum will maybe say, I've told him 100 times today. And you kind of think, well, you're upsetting yourself, you're repeating it to him, you're upsetting him. It's not actually being helpful or purposeful to keep repeating it. Sorry, Mum's also just let the cat into the room. I'll try and keep him off the keyboard, which is where cats seem to want to go. So I think that it's learning also not to be repetitive, give up after a few times. And what I've had to realise is that I might want to try and communicate something, but if it's really not that important, if it's just because I want to communicate it, then I let it go. I don't push it. And I started thinking about what an analogy might be. And an analogy that I came up with was, it feels like being in, for example, Glasgow city centre, which I know well. I used to cut about in Glasgow when I was younger. I don't do it any longer, but you know every shortcut to take, you know every wee route to go down, where it will get you to. You can cut through that shop and it'll take you out here. And or if you're in at night time, you know, you can go down this alleyway and you'll get to this pub or that bar or that restaurant. And all of a sudden, you don't know the streets anymore. There's one-way streets everywhere. You turn down a street you've gone down 1,000 times before, and there's a barrier and you can't get through it. You might decide, I'm going to duck under the barrier because I know if I keep going down this street, I'm going to get to where I want to go. But you duck under the barrier and then there's a brick wall in front of your face. It's that kind of a thing, where you what's familiar before is all of a sudden not familiar. And I mean, I've certainly been in a car with somebody when I was driving and they were reading a map and they couldn't read the map, and it was so frustrating. But I think ultimately what I got to was to realise that really, you know, does the destination matter? It doesn't really matter. And for me, it's about more saying, right, okay, I'm in this car with my dad. The car's driving itself. I've not really got much control. He's not really got much control. So just go with it. Just try and make the journey as pleasant as possible. And I also started then getting really angry at Alzheimer's. And I thought, I'll be polite, I thought, stuff you, Alzheimer's. You're not going to enlist me against this man because you've already moved in and taken over a lot of him. So I'm not going to let you take me over and take my communication over and the way I communicate with him, because I think very easily it was starting to do that. And that's just born out of shock, inexperience, lack of knowledge about the illness. I think as well, I've done mindfulness now for 10 years, and I feel almost as if I've been doing it just in readiness for what I'm doing now. I think the mindfulness helps me probably be a little bit more self-aware. It helps me to distinguish between what I see and I hear coming from my dad and what's actually happening. And I started then thinking, also because I've been asked to do this, I started to think, how if I had a chat with him now and explained, you know, or chat with him in the past about how things are now, what would he say to me and what would his advice be? And that helped me because I got to connect with him again as the person I know, who he will always be. And it's that person that I love, not this illness that has taken over this person. And so it's important for me always to continue to be as kind as I possibly can be. And I'm not perfect, none of us are. And it's so difficult. As Liz said, you know, you feel guilty if you do snap. I try very, very hard not to, but sometimes when you said, Dad, don't let the cat out, Dad, don't let the cat out, Dad, don't let the cat out, I just fed the birds, and then he lets the cat out and you go, you let the cat out. And then he's looking at you like, why are you shouting at me? Because he's not used to that. And you do feel bad about it. And I think also as a carer, you know, we will make mistakes because this is all about learning. This is stuff that I've never dealt with before. We will make mistakes, there's nothing surer, but keep learning and don't give yourself a hard time about making mistakes. That's really important. Don't judge yourself. Don't and it's so hard not to feel guilty and judge yourself, but don't, just let it go and move on, because all that does then is make you feel more tired, more stressed, more challenged, more exhausted, and that's not going to be good for you, and it's not going to be good for your loved one and your family around you. One thing that I haven't mentioned, and it happened right back at the beginning last March when this all kicked off. One of the psych nurses came and she was lovely and she was really helpful. But I said to her, I'm hardwired to tell the truth. how am I going to deal with this? Because the truth doesn't seem to fit in this existence anymore. And she said to me, I'm going to tell you a story that was personal to her. Her father was in a care home with dementia. Her mum had died 5 years previously, and she got a call one day about her normally very placid father to be told that he was really upset, and the care staff couldn't calm him down. They couldn't quiet him down. They said, you'll need to come and see him. And she did, and she took her son with her. And when she got there, what was wrong was he was wanting to, he didn't know where his wife was. And no one was telling him where his wife was. Where's your mother? I don't know where she is. And she just said to him, she's through in the kitchen making a pot of mince. And he said, fine. And that was it. It was left. She said, we left, and her son was in shock and said, Mum, you've just lied. You've looked Grandpa straight in the face and you've lied at him. And she said it was a therapeutic lie. So she introduced me to the idea of the therapeutic lie. And that is where you don't need to feel that you need to tell the truth or for the truth to be understood. And if it makes life easier for your loved one, then it's okay to tell a lie. And that's was difficult for me to get my head around, and I still sometimes struggle with it. But it's important to me that I understand that that's again coming from a place of kindness and care and love and compassion. That's the reason that I'm doing it. We had a situation just on Sunday in here where my aunt, my dad's sister from the States called. I had a chat to her, my mum had a chat to her, and then she wanted to hear her brother's voice. She just wanted, I mean, she's 86, she may not be over here ever again. And Dad said, he just put his head down, he said, I'm not in talking form. And that's so unlike my dad. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, I'm not in talking form. And I said, well, you don't have to chat, just we've done the chat bit, just say hello, she just wants to hear your voice. But it turned out afterwards that what was wrong was that he thought that she was phoning looking for money so that she could get a flight home from America. And he believes he hasn't got any money and he couldn't give her money. And he was so upset about it. And I said to Mum, I think if he's still upset tomorrow, I'll get his checkbook out and we'll write a cheque out to Imelda and we'll get him to sign it as best he can. And he'll maybe feel like he's done something then. Mum was horrified at me, so much so that I started to think maybe that's a bit over the top. I don't know. I didn't have to make the decision because the next day he'd forgotten that she'd phoned in any case. So I think it completely is a role reversal. You know, I'm an only daughter. I had the typical father-daughter relationship. I adored him. He completely had me up on this pedestal. He fixed everything for me. He was so capable. If there were any issues ever, that man knew every answer and could do everything that was known to man. But that's completely changed now, and it's the opposite way around. But I also say to him, when he'll say to me, maybe I'm taking him to an appointment and he's shuffling about and his mobility is getting very bad, and he'll say I'm a nuisance. And I just say to him, you're not a nuisance. Once upon a time, I was too small and I couldn't walk very well, and you picked me up and carried me. It's just my turn to do this for you. So he kind of goes, oh, right, okay. So again, that's just trying to be kind, always trying to be kind. I think the city analogy is kind of good for me. That helped me think about things a wee bit. Just giving up, finding out how to get to a destination, or even, you know, as Norman was saying, does it really matter? Is the destination really worth it? I think also this has made me think about my communication with other members of my family, because I mean, my partner and I have had difficulties. We're not in a good way just now as well, and we are talking about splitting up. And I think to myself, I don't think I've spent enough time communicating properly with him, because I feel as if this is draining all my communication energy, life force out of me, because you do it, and it is 24/7 for us as well. Where are you left at the end of the day with any energy to think about having a quality conversation with someone else? I think possibly it's improved my mum and I's communication slightly, because the reverse is my mum and I were not good communicators, and we've been forced to communicate better because we've been forced to discuss this stuff and try and work together. to figure some things out. But I guess really what I would say to anyone who's communicating with dementia is, the headline for me is, this is a learning journey. It changes all the time. Even for someone who smugly thought that they understood communication and has studied it and worked in it, it's a game changer. It really is. But for me, it's just about intention, and be kind and keep being kind. And that includes to yourself and everyone else round about you. Recognise the illness. It's not the person. It's not the person. Try and remember the person when you're communicating with this person with this illness. And I think that's basically what I wanted to say. And hopefully that's helped some people. I don't know, obviously with the great big fat caveat that this has just been my experience so far, and we're not experienced with this. We've only been doing this for about a year, so it's all pretty new to me as well.
That's great. Thanks, Deborah. Okay, so again, thank you very much for being so open and honest about your own situation as well. And I'm sure there's lots of people who can, resonate with you as well, and who might have experienced the same type of issues as well. So it's good to hear it from different perspectives and get ideas about what you might be able to do to help each other out. Okay, so we are kind of running a bit short of time on this end of the webinar, but I think it was important to hear from everyone who was speaking today. So what we can do is we can move on. We were just wanting to kind of close round the webinar, and each of the ones that we do, we were just wanting to get some kind of hints and tips from all of you who are on the call today. So if there's anything that you have done that you think has helped with communication, or any kind of words of wisdom that you'd like to give to other carers as well, we'd really appreciate the opportunity to gather that from you just now, so we can put it into the handout as well that we're going to create. And that's what Gillian's going to do through the Jamboard. We're probably not going to have time for questions, I don't think, at this stage, but if there is anyone who's got any questions, you'll all have had my email to get the link to come. So if there's anything that's really important for you, anything you really want to find out about, if you email me the questions after today, I'll make sure that we get answers for you for them. So Gillian, if you want to take over at the moment with the Jamboard, and hopefully we can get some hints and tips for everyone.
Thank you, Amanda. Yes, and apologies for running over a little bit, because I think we'll be a bit late in finishing. And obviously, if anybody has any prior engagements elsewhere, we understand if you need to leave, so don't worry too much about that. So in a moment, I'm going to post a link into the chat box, which will take you into the Jamboard. And all you have to do is click on the link, and it'll take you directly into it. Now, when you get into the Jamboard, you'll see a big screen. And what I've done, actually, I hope you don't mind, Deborah, but while you were talking, I've put some of the key points I was picking up from you as being sort of hints and tips for carers. So I've popped them in there already to give you an idea of some of the things that you might want to put into the space. When you go in there, you'll see a page that says advice and information sharing from one carer to another. So it's just any kind of hints, tips, or messages you want to share with other carers, you can put in there. So when you're in there, on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see 4 icons down. There's a little sticky note. If you click on the sticky note, it looks like a square with a turned up corner. It'll automatically pull up a little post-it, and it says sticky note at the top. And you can select your colour, you pop your little message in there by typing, and then you click save, and it'll automatically populate it into the whiteboard. There's also at the top, you'll see that there's a screen. So there's 2 little pages. The first one is the advice section, and then there's a little bit for your feedback as well on today's session. If you want to leave any feedback for us, or indeed if you want to put any of your questions in there, you can do that too. So I'm going to go ahead and share the link with you now. Like I said, please just speak if you're struggling with it at all. I can help you with it and talk you through it.
I'm just going to go now. Bye, everybody.
No problem. Bye, Doris. Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, I've put the link into the chat box now. Can everybody see it?
No. No.
It comes through, Amanda?
I can see it in mine. If you click on, if everyone clicks on the chat box, it should open it up. You should be able to see the link there.
No.
Can you?
No. Just the messages.
I can see it on mine.
Yeah.
Not in mine.
I'll try and send it to you privately, Elizabeth, and see if that works.
Is everyone else getting it okay? Yeah, okay. If some people can, even if not everyone can get on it, we know obviously with technology sometimes it can be a bit temperamental. So for anyone who can go on, that would be great. Or if not, alternatively, if you just put some hints and tips into the chat box, we'll be able to help to get that back for you.
Can see some messages starting to come in now, so that's brilliant.
Okay, that's good.
I'll summarise some of the things that I was picking up from when Deborah was presenting. So a therapeutic lie can be okay if it helps make someone feel happy and safe. This is a learning journey and it changes all the time. Always try to be kind. Behaviour is communication. Try not to sweat the small stuff. Give up on always trying to reach a destination. Just go with it and make the journey as pleasant as possible. Don't talk over the person talking about them to others. Include them in what's being said. That's a good one as well. Another one coming in just now about pick your battles. That's great, thanks.
And I think one of the main things we want everyone to think about today is obviously, you know, hearing from both the ladies, it is, you know, a huge part of your relationships with the person with dementia, regardless of what kind of relationship you have, whether they're your spouse or your partner or your mum or your dad or your brother or your sister. Relationship will communication to that relationship will have been there for the full amount of time, and you might have had a wee kind of shorthand about how you communicated with each other or things that you did together and the way that you interacted with each other. And when that changes, that can be quite a hard you know, process to go through. So it's just about, you know, taking it a bit easy on yourselves and knowing that it is a difficult thing to go through when there's changes in your communication, and also prepare yourself for the fact that there will be changes as you go along, and that actually you maybe have to let yourself feel some of that pain and some of that sadness in order to keep moving forward, and then looking for other ways to communicate with somebody in a different way. And that's why we're having our session in 2 weeks' time, which is round about meaningful activities, because it might be that you're going through a process just now where you start to realise that the communication has changed and that you have to do it in a different way. And so we don't want people sitting thinking, well, what will I do now? So that's why we've kind of linked it into the next session, which we're doing on the 26th of May, which will be about meaningful activities that you can try with the person with dementia if you're looking for new ways to communicate. And it's about trying out, you know, different things to do with each other that might then still bring that connection back for you.
We've still got some great comments coming in here, so thanks everyone.
Good.
Yeah. There's a nice one here. As the disease progresses, we can still find hooks to chat and laugh with them, reminisce and finding things that grab their interest.
Yeah.
And for anyone who's not sure about where the feedback section is, if you look at the top of your screen, you'll see a little square that's got a 1/2 in it. If you click the arrow to the right, it takes you on to the next page of the whiteboard. And there's a space there for some feedback if you want to share any feedback.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll just give another couple of minutes for people to put in their comments on the Jamboard. And while we're doing that, I'll just bring the webinar to a close today and just remind everyone that we have recorded the session today, as I said. So as soon as those links are available and live for you to download the session, I'll make sure that you all get an email with the links for that. And then we will be creating handouts, as I said, for each of the sessions that we create. So again, once those have been all completed and developed, we'll also make sure that you get access to those as well, so that there'll be a helpful reminder for you just as you're going through, because some of these things might not come up for a little while. They might be happening to you just now, or it might be for something in the future. So we just wanted to be able to give you something to take away with you as well, so that you've got that bit of help and support as well. I just want to also thank both of our speakers, Elizabeth and Deborah, for speaking today and coming along and being really open and honest. We really appreciate that, and it was wonderful to hear about your relationships and how you had that communication with each other and within your relationships with the people that you care for. And I'd also like to thank Angie and Norman for giving us some really great presentations to think about communication and and how it is with each other, and different ways of viewing it, and not just thinking about your verbal communication, and some hints and tips about what you might be able to do. And I think that problem solving kind of strategy is a really good way to kind of look at it and just break it down and make it a little bit easier to understand. And also to Gillian for being my partner in crime and getting all this up and running. So I hope everyone's really benefited and found it helpful, and found some of the information useful today. And as I said, we've got another few coming up in the next coming weeks. So if you don't have the links for those and you would like to come and attend them, then please just email me and I'll send the links out to you. We have one on the 26th of May, which is round about meaningful activities. And then we have one on the 9th of June, which is about people living in care homes at the moment. So there's a lot of information round about some work that Tide's been doing, and also some work that Alzheimer Scotland are doing round about that. And the last one we have, which is coming in, I think it's the 23rd of June, is round about confidence for carers coming out of lockdown, because obviously all the restrictions are starting to lift as of Monday. Quite a lot are coming off, but that doesn't mean that everything's just going to suddenly snap back to normal, and there's going to be lots of different issues and maybe some anxieties and worries for you as carers about how we go back to some kind of normality. And so we want to try and help you through having some discussions around about that, and giving you some hints and tips on how to help yourself in your own emotional and physical well-being as we start to come out of lockdown as well. So if you're interested in any of those sessions, please let me know, and I'll give you the links to that. But we'll also be putting out across social media and across all of our networks in advance of these sessions as well, just to remind you of when they are. Okay, is that everyone finished putting their comment? Have you got still comments coming on, Jill?
Yeah, we've got an amazing amount of comments actually, and some great. I think it's going to be a lovely resource to share with you all after the session. Your own experiences and your advice to each other, which is really nice to see. So thank you for sharing all your thoughts there.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, if that's everyone, then we will be bringing it to a close, that we're not running over too much time, because I know you're all really, really busy and got lots of things that you need to be doing. Some people have already had to go off and do other things as well. So I just want to say again, thank you for coming along this afternoon. I hope it's been helpful for you, and I hope to see some of you again in 2 weeks' time. And if there's anything at all you need, any questions, any information, anything at all, just drop me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.